Welcome to Shut Up Cover Lit, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Ford. We're here for the fifth in a six-part series as we bathe in the baths. An Enemy of the People by Henrik Ibsen. This being the final act of the play. So, what happened? We are in the doctor's study as he rounds up the stones which have been cast through his windows. And you got to remember, all these people are without sin, right? None of these people were wary of throwing that first stone. Moving on, he gets a letter from his landlord telling him, hey, you got to go. You got to get lost. Terrible deal. You know, he didn't want to do it, but his reputation, don't you know? Mrs. Stockman then has a row at him because that seems to be Mrs. Stockman's place in this play. What are we doing here? Cockeyed? What did you call me? That seems to be Mrs. Stockman's place in the play, to have a row at her husband, and to be the one that in the overarching theme of this thing maybe is set there to look wise. I'm not 100% sure. She's badgering him regardless. See what I did there? Then Petra comes home. She's been fired by Mrs. Busk from her teaching position. Terrible deal, She didn't want to do it, don't you know? But her reputation, don't you know? After this, Captain Horster shows up. Captain Horster being the person who sort of was the big burly man that assisted this family through the crowd of cretins who was more than happy to cast stones at them. Also, with Captain Horster, well, terrible deal, don't you know? Reputations, don't you know? He's been fired too. He's got a plan, though. Then Mayor Pete shows up, and Mayor Pete wants to talk to the doc alone, and everyone gets out of the room whence Mayor Pete continues to suggest that the doc leaves town. Is this crooked? What is going on here? I'm not 100% sure. I can't get this thing straight. Anyway, Pete suggests that he gets out of town, and eventually, 6 months from now or so, he writes an apology. An apology. The doc doesn't like the sound of that. What does the doc have to apologize for? So the doc says to shove off, and Pete says, hey, look, you got to be responsible. Think of the wives and kids, don't you know? A lot of don't you knows in this play. After all, doesn't he know about Mr. Keel's will? Mr. Keel, K-I-I-L. I think it's Keel. I imagine that would be how that name would be pronounced. Morton Keel the Badger. Don't you know about the Badger's will? The doc says no, he doesn't. But it turns out that Keel the Badger will be leaving a great deal of wealth to Catherine and the children. And this excites the doctor. The doctor not quite being in the place to leave a whole lot of wealth to the wife and kids himself. This excites the doc, and that excitement gets up in Mayor Pete's fee-fees. Mayor Pete says, oh, I see. So this was all a sham. You put this on, did you? You just wanted to get that money. And the doc continues to tell him to get lost. Go ahead, shove off. Kick rocks, take a long walk on a short bridge. And the doc kicks him out just in time to host Mr. Keel himself. And here we go. Mr. Keel, the Badger, Mrs. Stockman's father, turns out he bought all the shares to the baths. Um, he bought all the shares to the Baths. After all, if it is his tannery, which it had been put out there that it was Mr. Keel's tannery that was doing most of the polluting itself, if it was his tannery doing that, he aims to have that little coinky-dink fixed, and he aims to have it fixed by the dock. So that inheritance for the boys and for Mrs. Stockman and for Petra, that is all dependent upon the dock working for Mr. Keel to reclaim the Baths. After all, they've got the power to do it themselves now. But Keel says before he leaves, I need an answer by 2 o'clock. You give me that answer by 2, son, and then we'll be in business. As he is leaving, Alaskan and Hovstad show up, and they're in on it. They know that the Badger's been buying up all the shares to the Baths. Now, the shares to the Baths basically means ownership. Sort of like if you were to buy the majority stock in a company. This is brilliant on Ibsen's behalf. Take a company and buy its stock. If you ever saw, what was that? The James Bond, the very first James Bond with the blonde guy in it, where they were returning to a gritty type of feel. And it had the song by Chris Cornell at the beginning. I can't remember, not Quantum of Solace, the very first one, about the casinos and whatnot. That was the story at the very beginning. And it took me forever to understand exactly what was going on at the beginning of that movie. But essentially what they were going to do is they were going to bomb a plane to tank the stock, then buy the company. The stock returns to value, and you've made billions of dollars off of millions. So essentially, that's what the Badger has in mind. No one wants to own the Baths at this point. So what we're going to do is we're going to buy up all the shares, fix the problems. Once that company is resurrected, we'll have so much money. But Hovstad and Alaskan know what has gone on when they show up. They say they know about the shares and they want, what is it they want? What is the power dynamic going on here? What is it that they want in all of this madness? They want the dock to run the paper? It's hard to say. Hard to say exactly why, but the dock is incensed at this, and he's about to whoop that ass. He can't find his stick, so he grabs an umbrella, and he's threatening Hovstad. Mrs. Stockman shows up to talk some sense into her husband and the situation, but the doc tells him he'd better jump out the window. Following this scuffle, the doc sends Mr. Keel a note that says, no, that's the deal. No. And he refuses now to leave the town. In fact, he and Petra will educate the next generation starting at the very bottom rungs of society. I got to start this. Bit of the conversation here with a Chandler Bing type of statement. Here on 76, we get this. Dr. Stockman says, but hang it all, it might be possible for science to discover some prophylactic, I should think, or some antidote of some kind. I've been ringing this bell this entire commentary here about current events and grafting them on to this play, but that quote really drove it home. You're talking about cancel culture. You're talking about a disease on the run. You're talking about prophylactics and antidotes that might possibly, conceivably, be in the future, but we'll have to get to work real hard. You're talking about the educated versus the unwashed. You're talking about riots in the streets. You're talking about buying shares at tumbled costs due to disease, due to the economy being driven down by disease. You're talking about the entire economy being on fire. You're talking about an unreliable media and a media that is about to go out of business. You're talking about rocks through windows. You're talking about attempts to control the narrative of the past to change positions in the future. Could this play be more 2020? I don't put that out there just to be facetious. That list of things that I just rattled off, every single one of them fits so painfully into the narrative that you can turn on your television, switch on your internet, get on your phone, and see every single day in this year. I don't know what else to say. It is amazing how well this narrative, how well these things, how well this phenomenon grafts onto today's world. And we end the story on 82. We get this. Dr. Stockman has called his family into his... Oh, wow, they're in his study, aren't they? That's where all this is taking place, is in his study. That is an interesting thing to take note of, as well as the lettered man's world is crashing in his study, and this is from whence he will rebuild all of those things to his name. Dr. Stockman has called his family into the study, and he has promised, no, by God, they're not going to leave town. They're not going to be driven out. In fact, what they're going to do is they're going to set up shop, set up a school, and they're going to educate the next generation. Dr. Stockman says, and my school shall be in the room where they insulted me and called me an enemy of the people. But we are too few as we are. I must have at least 12 boys to begin with. Mrs. Stockman says, you will certainly never get them in this town. To which Dr. Stockman replies, we shall. And he says to the boys, don't you know any street urchins, any regular ragamuffins? And Morton replies, yes, Father, I know lots. Don't you know any street urchins? Don't you know any regular ragamuffins? How many, by the way? How many are we looking for? But we are too few as we are. I must have at least 12 boys to begin with. 12. That number's awfully familiar, isn't it? Oh, that's right. Jesus had 12 disciples, didn't he? Jesus had the Mother Mary with him. Jesus had Mary Magdalene with him. He had 2 lady folk and 12 disciples. Is there any chance that what we're witnessing right here with this magical number of 12 plus a couple ladies on hand, is there any chance at all that this is just coincidence, coinkydink from Ibsen? Not at all. Also, when you're looking at it, what is he doing? He's trying to spread the truth. At the basest level, what the doc is doing here is he is aiming to spread the truth. And he needs his 12 disciples. Ibsen made some commentary in this very play, which was atheistic. And he made some commentary in this play which maybe not directly, but seemed to be rear-looking towards paganism, which was, now not in the way that we look at paganism today, but sort of as the mythology which paganism was. A return to the roots, if you will. That is what, was it Hofstad or Billings, I think, was looking towards returning to some form of nationalism earlier in this piece. That national. Now, here's something. When was this published? 1870s, I believe? 1897, 1882. First published in 1882. 60 years before World War II, 40 years before Hitler coming to power. What was Hitler doing? Hitler was looking to return to a former nationalism, returning Germany to the paganistic origins of their religion and religiosity. Now, it is true that on every Nazi's belt it said, what was it? Unst mit Gott, unst, something like that. We are with God. That was on every Nazi's belt. You have Hitchens to thank for that being so widespread knowledge, such widespread knowledge. Which is to say that oftentimes these reformations at a societal level, the type of which Hofstede and Billings were initially so hot to trot for, so hot to Trotsky for which they were so initially hot to trot. These types of movements are often messy. They're never spearheaded with all guns pointed in one direction. That's almost never how these things go. You see this today. You see this today with all of these movements prompting people in so many different directions. But once the mob gets a hold of anything, hell breaks loose. Once the mob gets a hold of those rocks in front of Dr. Stockman's house, once the mob gets a hold of all of these ideas that Dr. Stockman has been parading about, there's no correct interpretation for them, except the prevailing interpretation for them. The mob is unreasonable. The mob is the people. That is one of the commentaries of this play. The people, the great unwashed. I think it is maybe not fitting but fair to call them that. The great unwashed in this, ironically, in this play, the mob, the people, they don't have a whole lot of forward-looking direction. They move in unison, but not in chorus, if that makes any sense. They move as a mob. They're not thinking here in this piece. They have all of the information in front of them, and they refuse that information even to have its day. The next thing I want to talk about, there are so many twists in this act alone. So many twists. There's so many twists in this story. But this act alone had so many twists and stabs in the back. In fact, the stabbing in the back was mostly by the doc here. Having been stabbed in the back by everyone in the previous act, the doc decides, well, I could put in a great deal of effort to reclaim my name, or I could just be the bad guy with the truth on my side. Chael Sonnen-like, the bad guy. One more in the books, one more in the win column, and one more for the bad guy. But did anyone see that O. Henry twist with the Badger buying the baths after the shares in them had crashed? That's a businessman. The Badger is not wealthy for no reason. The Badger has his eyes open, and he has he's an opportunist. Opportunists are willing to take everything is an opportunity. You just have to come at it from the right angle. This is something Morton Keel, the Badger, whose name is carried into that next proposed generation, by the way, by Morton the doctor's son, who is speaking at the end, by the way. Being a businessman and being an opportunist, he is able, when the doctor tells him all of this bad news, he is able to look at that and see, A, he thinks it's a joke. He thinks it's a razz. Even then, he was able to plot and plan on it. There's no chance that he just happened to be walking around and get inspired to buy all the shares to the Baths. This is something that took planning. That's why he left in such a hurry back in Act 2, I believe it was. When he heard about all this, he left in such a hurry. He had to get his affairs in an order. Pouncing on that opportunity. Look, Ibsen plants his seeds early and he covers them well. We've seen that through all the Ibsen plays we've read so far. He plants his seeds early and he covers them well. In doing so, Ibsen had set up this O. Henry twist very early on, and it was easy. It wasn't easy to forecast what was going to happen, but it was easy to see something was there to be done, simply from the fact that there was such a great misunderstanding. And even remember back in that second act, when this idea was brought up, the doc just kind of wanted to get rid of him. So we see, no, it's a razz. Go ahead. I need you to leave. I got business to take care of. It's a razz. Go ahead and go. He did not care to really fix this misunderstanding. So that is to me the most impressive part of this play, that no other man but the businessman was there to snatch up the opportunity. It wasn't Mayor Pete. It wasn't the doc. It wasn't Billings and Hofstad and Alaskan, who had hoped so prodigiously for their own opportunities and capital. It wasn't them. It was the capitalist. It was the capitalist amongst them who was there to snatch up the opportunity and make a play. And here's the thing that looks and sounds very dirty, very backhanded. How so? Why must it be? What Keel was willing to do was buy the Baths at his own risk, which risk is the name of the game in capitalism. Risk is the name of the game. He was able to buy the Baths at his own risk and say, we will put in the capital, we will return this capital to the business to fix said problem. I will use my own capital with my own business to redirect these pollutants, and we're going to turn things around. Taking the risk will grant us the opportunity. So it is, but who are the ones that are ultimately motionless? Those goddamn commies. It's Billings and Hofstad and Alaskan, who sort of get in the way to agree with the doc, inspire revolution. When they understand said revolution will have negative repercussions for them, they stab the doc in the back. And then at the very end, when they understand the doc is in a place of power, maybe we ought to do something about this and go garner some attention from him. Maybe we oughtn't have done that thing the act before. But they do not come to him to apologize. They come to him essentially to make demands. And get nothing. They start with nothing, they end with nothing. And in the middle, we understand their business is collapsing. We understand that the People's Messenger is going out of business. What a play for 2020. Great googly holy moly. That is all that I have for this episode, the penultimate episode, by the way, of An Enemy of the People. Next week we will have episode 6 of a 6-part series, which will be the review for An Enemy of the People. 3 good things, 3 bad things, quotes, literary discussion, rating, and recommendation based on the text. I hope to see you back here next week as well.